Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Why the Warren Commission may be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public.
I'm Len Osanic. This is the control room in which I stream, broadcast live Black Op Radio to the world. I'd like to show you the studio area in which we have been working on 50 Reasons for 50 Years, the YouTube series that you've been watching. Here is where we film. Here is where we edit the series. Now, why is it that a small operation can produce something which we feel has a lot more truth to it than anything portrayed by the major media with their unlimited resources? Author Joseph McBride this week looks into the bias of the major media in regards to the truth in the JFK assassination.
This is Joseph McBride. Into the Nightmare is a memoir of my own investigations of the murders of President Kennedy and Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. I took these photographs of John F. Kennedy while working as a volunteer in his Wisconsin presidential primary campaign in 1960, the same year I became a professional journalist. I was 12 years old and Kennedy was my political hero. He inspired me to want to make a career in politics, but his assassination and the cover-up by the government and the media caused me to lose my faith in our political system. Before the assassination, most Americans like me tended to trust the government and the media when they told us what was happening. But ever since 1963 and the widening of the Vietnam War that resulted from Kennedy's murder, that is no longer the case. Polls show that most of the public distrusts the government and has a negative view of the news media. At the same time, most Americans through the years have rejected the official story that a lone gunman killed President Kennedy and that no conspiracy was involved. As many as 80% of the public believes otherwise. It often seems that the other 20% are members of the media. Instead of being seen as truth-tellers, the news media, or in the words of critic Jonathan Rosenbaum, the media industrial complex, are regarded by most Americans as flagrantly biased obfuscators. The media have become organs for covering up what the government is doing in our name. On the day Kennedy was killed, our trusted news anchors such as David Brinkley and Walter Cronkite shared the world's shock. Television covered the events in Dallas and Washington that long weekend with remarkable immediacy. But TV and newspaper reporters mostly swallowed the lies they were being told by the police and the U.S. government and failed to conduct truly independent investigations. They were guilty of what Mark Lane would call a rush to judgment in blaming the murders of Kennedy and Tippit on Lee Harvey Oswald without credible evidence. By the day after the assassination, Brinkley was saying on NBC TV, quote, "The President of the United States was killed by a punk with a mail-order rifle," unquote. Case closed, or so it seemed to those who were being brainwashed by television.
The fatal shots that were fired from behind and struck him in the back of the head, and then incongruously, some way, another bullet struck him in the front of the neck.
But many of us were still thinking for ourselves. I heard the first network radio reports that the shots in Dealey Plaza came from the front, from the area of the railroad bridge or the grassy knoll. When the radio abruptly stopped reporting those shots around 1 p.m. on November 22nd, I became suspicious. I believed Oswald when he insisted, "I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir."
People have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything.
Did you shoot the president?
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir. I'm just a patsy.
Tom Wicker was the respected White House reporter for the New York Times. His banner story on November 23rd accurately reported what the two leading Parkland Hospital doctors who tried to save Kennedy told the media at a press conference on the day of the shooting. As Wicker wrote, Mr. Kennedy was hit by a bullet in the throat just below the Adam's apple, they said. This wound had the appearance of a bullet's entry. But Wicker contradicted this by reporting that all the shots were fired from behind by a gunman in the Texas School Book Depository. The banner headline read, "Kennedy is killed by sniper as he rides in car in Dallas." For the rest of his life, Wicker would attack conspiracy theorists. Carl Bernstein, the former Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Washington Post, wrote a revealing and influential article for Rolling Stone in 1977 on the CIA penetration of the media. He wrote that more than 400 so-called journalists in the past 25 years had been working with the CIA on the side, or were CIA employees working undercover as reporters and columnists. Bernstein identified 3 news organizations as the most involved with the CIA: the New York Times, CBS, and Time Incorporated. It's no coincidence that all three organizations have been the most strenuous in promoting the lone nut theory of the assassination and attempting to exonerate the CIA and other government agencies of any involvement. After the mob-connected Jack Ruby shot Oswald on live TV in the Dallas City Jail, surrounded by dozens of policemen and reporters, the Times ran a banner headline on November 25th, "President's Assassin Shot to Death in Jail Corridor by Dallas Citizen." The Times has continued trying to convict Oswald in its pages, even though he never lived to stand trial. The paper's support of the Warren Commission extended to running its entire report as a supplement in September 1964 and publishing an instant paperback edition with Bantam Books. When the Commission released its 26 volumes of supposedly supporting evidence that November, volumes that have since helped independent researchers tear apart many of the report's claims, Anthony Lewis of the Times reported on the same day they were released that the witness testimony in the 26 volumes, quote, overwhelmingly supported, unquote, the report's conclusions. When did Lewis have time that day to read the testimony of more than 500 witnesses? Longtime CBS reporter and anchor Dan Rather built his network career largely on his dubious coverage of the assassination. Rather had been based in Dallas and was the network's Southwest bureau chief in New Orleans in November 1963. For Kennedy's trip, Rather convinced his superiors in New York to, quote, lay on double coverage all over Texas and quadruple it in Dallas, unquote. So CBS had 5 network TV production crews in Dallas, including the only live hookup to cover Kennedy's visit. The other 2 major networks each had only one. Rather later wrote, CBS was staffed for the road as fully as a network can be without planning an invasion. Still, I do not mean to invest in this any mystic implications. We were preparing for the unexpected, an incident, a reaction, a story. We were not having visions, but whatever was to happen in Dallas, I knew we would be in an unusually good position to cover it.
At that moment, a shot clearly hit the governor in the front, and he fell back in the seat. Mrs. Connolly immediately threw herself over him in a protective position. In the next instant, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Rather was all over the coverage in Dallas, often making statements on camera and radio that did not match the eventual official version. But over the years, he, with Walter Cronkite, posted many specials promoting the Warren Commission version. The most prominent was the 4-part 1967 series, the CBS Inquiry, The Warren Report. It tried to counter the growing criticism of the report by following the standard media line of ignoring or dismissing conflicting evidence and twisting the facts to make it seem as if Oswald was guilty and acted alone. When Oliver Stone rattled the media cage with his influential 1991 film JFK, presenting an alternate and more accurate view of what happened in Dallas, Washington Post columnist George Will wrote that Stone, quote, may be an intellectual sociopath, unquote. Stone declared, the film is about who owns reality. Is it the press? I think they blew it from day one. And his JFK led to the release of millions of pages of previously secret U.S. government documents on the assassination, a boon to independent researchers. Henry Luce's Time Incorporated, which published Time and Life, quickly managed to get control of Abraham Zapruder's amateur film of the assassination, which should have been taken into custody by the government as evidence. Life magazine doled out frames from the film for the next few years on a selective, misleading basis. As many have noted, Life spun the story visually and verbally to hide the fact that Kennedy was thrown violently back and to the left by what appeared to most people to be a shot from the front. Life briefly began to reconsider its simplistic theories in 1967, at a time when many independent researchers such as Mark Lane and Sylvia Marr were publishing popular books dissenting from the official version. But Life abruptly ended its reconsideration. Broadcast and cable TV networks continue to run propagandistic specials on the assassination, usually relying on visual trickery and outright falsehoods. They use carefully selected talking heads, official propagandists, and friendly journalists and authors to spin the evidence in the official direction while mocking and maligning what the media like to call conspiracy theorists. For the truth about what happened, you have to turn to independent radio shows, internet sites, assassination forums, and other non-mainstream sources. The same is largely true in book publishing. Most books in the case from major publishers uphold the official version, such as Gerald Posner's Case Closed and Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History. And dissenting books are usually published by small maverick houses or self-published. Why is it such a taboo in the mainstream media to deal honestly with this case even after 50 years? What could account for our most prominent media organizations habitually falsifying and hiding the truth? The vicious attacks on Stone's JFK revealed how seriously the members of the media who blew the Kennedy case in 1963, many of them receiving major promotions as a result, were threatened by a filmmaker pointing out their flagrant errors. But their deeper concern was the perceived danger of media dissenter and independent research into the true crime against the state committed from within can do to the fragile stability of the American political system. The corporations that support that system pay the media's bills through advertising. Reporters' salaries and access to news sources are dependent on their willingness to pretend that the emperor is wearing clothes. So the media have long relied on repeating the same few tired tropes to malign those who try to tell the truth. The prominent historian Richard Hofstadter led the way as early as November 1963 with a lecture at Oxford University on what he called the paranoid style in American politics. It was published as an essay in Harper's in 1964 and as part of a book with that title in 1965. While admitting that there are actual conspiracies in history, Hofstadter wrote, "The distinguishing thing about the paranoid style is not that its exponents see conspiracies or plots here and there in history, but that they regard a vast or gigantic conspiracy as the motive force in historical events. History is a conspiracy." Hofstadter had long worried about McCarthyism and the tendency of right-wing extremists to conjure up largely imaginary communist conspiracies in the U.S. He and other establishment historians, along with many mainstream liberals, feared that an honest investigation of the assassination might destabilize the new Lyndon Johnson regime and lead to a new witch hunt against their own kind. Ironically, they were relieved when a supposed lone leftist was assigned all the blame and then disposed of. Hofstadter's pseudo-psychiatric analysis of dissenters from the official version of history as paranoid and delusional believers in vast and sinister conspiracies quickly was adopted by the mainstream media. Ad hominem arguments are easier to make and more intimidating than seriously discussing dangerous facts. A formerly top-secret 1967 CIA memo helped codify this approach, advising the use of friendly elite contacts in politics and the media to go about countering and discrediting the claims of the conspiracy theorists by portraying them as leftist ideologues who were financially interested, hasty and inaccurate in their research, and infatuated with their own theories. This language suggested by Hofstadter and the CIA largely permeate the cliched and dishonest media discourse today. Anyone taking a contrary view has to endure a barrage of character attacks. It's easy to see how much this talk of paranoia and delusion is simply projection on the part of the media, and how much of it is a way of avoiding doing their actual job. One of my heroes in the media, yes, there are a few independent reporters who have done their job despite it all, was the small-town Texas newspaper editor Penn Jones, Jr. In his Midlothian Mirror, published in the countryside outside Dallas, and his newsletter and self-published books, Jones broke many stories and found witnesses the bigger outlets studiously ignored. When I asked Penn in 1983 if he thought the assassination would ever be fully solved, he replied, "I and several other people solved the case back in the 60s. And he said in the mainstream media, "I just don't believe it's possible for that many smart men to be so ignorant." Here is Penn Jones in his newspaper office from the low-budget 1967 documentary film Rush to Judgment by Emile D'Antonio and Mark Lane, from Lane's book of the same title.
I think all of us who love this country should be alerted that something is wrong in the land.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.